The snow came down like a curtain of silence, each flake slow and deliberate, as if heaven itself sought to cover the shame of what was happening in the street. Evelyn stood barefoot on the frozen boards of the porch, her newborn wrapped against her chest, the infant's cries piercing the cold like a wound. She watched her husband's back retreating into the storm, his shoulders hunched not against the wind, but against the weight of what he could no longer bear. He didn't turn, not once, as if the act of leaving could be softened by never meeting her eyes again. His boots crunched a fading rhythm in the snow, steady, cowardly, final. "Thomas!" she called, her voice cracking like thin ice. The baby stirred, mewling, small fists pressed against her chest. She took a step forward, her breath hanging white before her face. "Please." But Thomas Carter, 35, a man who once lifted her over a threshold with laughter in his throat, kept walking. His figure blurred into the storm, swallowed by drifting veils of white, until he was only a shadow. Then less than that gone. The cold bit her feet until it felt like glass cutting into skin, but she did not move. Only when the baby's cry sharpened, desperate and thin, did she stagger back inside the little shack that smelled of smoke and abandonment. She pressed her cheek against the downy head, whispering, "Hush, little one. Hush now." The fire had burned to embers. She knelt, rocking the infant, trying not to hear the voices rising beyond the thin walls. Neighbors had gathered. She caught their words carried cruel and clear through the cracks. "He left her with a babe." Another voice, female, rich with judgment. "What kind of woman drives a man to walk away in the dead of winter?" The gossip clung to the air like smoke she could not escape. Evelyn pressed her eyes shut. She had no answer. Perhaps she had been too needy, too fragile after the birth, too slow in her recovery. Or perhaps Thomas had never been made for hardship, his hands more suited to cards and whiskey than to wood and soil. What mattered was the empty space beside her, the absence heavier than the walls around her. The wind howled through gaps in the boards. The baby whimpered. She pulled the blanket tighter, though the fabric was already thin, already damp from the snow. Her body ached from childbirth, every muscle weak, yet there was no one to carry her now. She rose slowly, determined to walk into town, perhaps to the church where someone might have mercy enough to let her rest. Outside, the night deepened. The snow whirled, stinging her face, blinding her eyes. The baby cried louder, the sound raw and insistent, cutting into her like truth she could not muffle. She staggered forward, boots sinking, breath ragged. The street lay hushed but for the whispers that followed her steps. A door creaked open, then shut. Curtains shifted. She felt their stares, their pity, their scorn. Sheriff Amos Pike leaned on his rail, the glow of a cigar illuminating his face. He did not move to help. "You best find shelter, ma'am," he said flatly, as though she were a stranger, as though he had not danced at her wedding years ago. His words carried no kindness, only dismissal. Evelyn lowered her gaze and kept walking. Her arms aching from holding the child close, her pride shattering with each breath. At the corner, Martha Briggs, wrapped in furs, stood like a sentinel of contempt. "Best you go back east where you came from," she sneered. "No woman's meant to last out here without a man." The sting of those words pierced deeper than the cold. Evelyn's throat burned, but she said nothing. She simply clutched her child tighter and trudged past, her steps slow, her body trembling. Her strength finally gave way near the church steps. She sank onto them, her knees buckling, her back pressed against the wood. The baby cried against her breast, tiny and fierce. She whispered through chattering teeth, "You will not die tonight. Do you hear me? You will not." Her breath came fast, fogging the air. The snow thickened, falling in great sheets, wrapping the world in pale suffocation. She closed her eyes, half hoping for sleep, half dreading it, her arms the only shield between her child and the dark. It was then she felt it, the change in the air, a shadow looming through the storm. At first she thought it might be Thomas returning, guilt heavy in his step. She dared to open her eyes. But what she saw rooted her breath in her chest. A man emerged from the snow, towering, broad as a cedar, bare chest glistening with frost though the cold cut sharp enough to slice bone. His skin bore the bronze hue of the land, his hair long, black, glistening with flakes. His eyes, dark, steady, ancient, locked on hers with a gravity that made her heart pound against her ribs. She gasped, clutching her child closer. She had seen Apaches before, but never like this, never with such terrible quietness about him, as though the storm bent itself around his will. He did not speak at first. He only walked toward her with measured steps, the snow swirling at his ankles, his presence filling the night with something larger than fear. He stopped before her. For a moment, neither moved. Only the baby's thin wail bridged the silence. His gaze shifted to the child, then back to Evelyn, unreadable yet piercing. When she thought she might faint from the intensity of it, he bent and lifted her as though she weighed nothing, the child between them, shielded by his arms. His chest radiated heat despite the cold, a strange, unshakable warmth that startled her. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to protest, to cry out, but her body sagged against him, too weary to resist. The snow fell harder, the storm closing around them like a curtain, muffling the gasps of those few onlookers who dared to watch. At last, his voice rumbled low, deep, final, carrying not a question but a vow. "From now on," he said, each word steady as stone, "you are mine." The world seemed to still. The firelight from the church lantern flickered across his face, revealing a strength that was not merely physical, but something rooted deeper, something immovable. Evelyn's breath hitched, torn between terror and relief, shame and an unfamiliar sense of safety. The baby, pressed between them, quieted, as if soothed by the sound of his voice. And in that frozen street, with the snow spiraling like ghosts around them, Evelyn felt the last thread of her old life snap, and something unnameable, fierce, and uncertain begin. The first thing Evelyn felt when she opened her eyes was warmth, a strangeness so foreign after the night's bitter frost that she startled upright, clutching for her child. The baby lay nestled in a cradle of animal hides near the fire, tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, cheeks pink with life. Relief washed through her in a trembling wave, loosening a sob she had not known she was holding. Her body ached, every joint still raw from childbirth and cold, but the sight of her daughter alive brought strength enough to rise. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, roasted meat, and damp earth. It was larger than she expected, though rough-hewn, walls of timber, beams blackened with years of fire. A single window let in muted daylight, blurred by the falling snow outside. The storm still raged, muffling the world in white, but here inside, the air pulsed with steady warmth. She tightened her shawl and moved closer to her child, whispering a prayer of thanks. A sound caught her, rhythmic, deliberate. She turned. Across the room, the man knelt on a low stool, knife in hand, shaving curls of wood from a block. His bare shoulders gleamed in the firelight, corded muscles shifting like carved stone. He had tied his hair back loosely, yet strands fell across his face as he worked. He did not look up at her, as if her waking was no surprise. The scrape of blade on wood filled the silence between them. Evelyn's heart stuttered. She remembered the weight of his arms as he carried her, the quiet authority of his voice. She pressed a hand to her breast, torn between fear and the strange steadiness his presence evoked. "Why?" she whispered, though she did not know if the word was meant for him or God. He set the knife aside, the carved wood taking shape into something she could not yet name. Only then did he raise his eyes to her, dark and unreadable. "Storm not end," he said, his voice low, each word shaped carefully, accented yet firm. "You stay. Child, stay." Her throat tightened. The words were not a question, not an offer, but a statement of fact. She should have bristled, yet the quiet certainty in his tone left her without argument. She sank onto the furs beside her baby, trembling, brushing a finger against the child's tiny hand. Time passed in silence, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the baby's soft sounds. He moved with quiet efficiency, adding wood to the flames, setting a clay pot over the embers. The scent of broth rose. Her stomach clenched painfully, reminding her she had eaten almost nothing since the birth. Shame flared, hot as the fire. She did not want his charity, yet hunger betrayed her. He ladled the steaming liquid into a wooden bowl and placed it before her. He did not look at her as he did so, nor did he linger. He simply returned to his stool, as though the act required no acknowledgement. Evelyn hesitated, fingers trembling on the rim of the bowl, before lifting it to her lips. The broth was rich, earthy, salted, each sip loosening the iron bands around her chest. Tears pricked her eyes. She lowered the bowl, whispering, "Thank you." He inclined his head slightly, nothing more. Outside, the wind battered the walls. The snow pressed against the window like a hand trying to smother the world. Evelyn gathered her baby into her arms and rocked gently, listening to the storm, to the steady rasp of his knife as he resumed carving. The firelight made the space seem smaller, more intimate, their breaths mingling in the shadows. When the child began to cry, Evelyn tried to soothe her, but exhaustion made her clumsy. Her hands shook, her voice cracked. Before she could despair, the man set aside his knife and came forward. She stiffened as he reached, but he only extended his arms, waiting. Something in his patience, his stillness, coaxed her into yielding. She placed the baby in his hold. The infant's cries softened almost at once as he cradled her against his chest. He swayed gently, humming a low tune, ancient, steady, like wind moving through canyon walls. Evelyn froze, her breath caught. The lullaby's rhythm seeped into her bones, easing even her own trembling. She watched his large hands cupping the child with surprising gentleness, the fierce warrior turned tender guardian. When the baby fell quiet, he handed her back, careful not to wake her. Their eyes met in that moment, a spark unspoken but undeniable. She wanted to thank him again, yet words felt thin beside the enormity of what she saw, that he had offered safety when no one else dared. By nightfall, exhaustion weighted her eyelids. He spread a blanket near the fire for her, placing another layer of furs without asking. She lay with the baby beside her, staring at the beams above, listening to the storm and the soft rhythm of his movements as he settled on the other side of the room. Sleep tugged at her, but her mind swam with unease. Who was this man to claim her so simply? Who was she to accept? The firelight flickered, shadows bending across his face as he sat against the wall, eyes half closed yet vigilant. He seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains, immovable, unbending. Yet she could not forget the sound of his voice when he hummed, the way the child had quieted in his arms. Her breath slowed. For the first time since Thomas's boots faded into the snow, she felt the faint outline of safety. It was not comfort, not trust, not yet, but the edge of a precipice she might one day step across. The wind screamed outside, battering the cabin, rattling the shutters as though the world demanded entry. Evelyn pressed her lips to her daughter's soft hair and whispered, "We'll survive this." But the words quivered with doubt. Across the fire, his eyes opened, glinting in the glow, catching hers through the flames. He said nothing, but the look carried weight, an unspoken vow, a claim she could neither accept nor reject. The storm howled, but his gaze held her steady, tethered in the chaos. And in that moment, with her child asleep against her heart, and a stranger's silent watch fixed upon her, Evelyn realized her life had already shifted course. Tomorrow, the town would talk, sharper than knives, their judgment louder than the wind. Tonight, though, in this cabin carved against the storm, a man who owed her nothing had made space for her to live. Her hand shook as she stroked the baby's cheek. The fire hissed, the storm roared, and the words he had spoken on the street returned to her, chilling and strangely protective all at once. "From now on, you are mine." She closed her eyes against the weight of them, not knowing whether to fear or to hope in what they meant. The storm eased after 3 days, leaving the land blanketed in a hush of white, fences swallowed, roofs bent low under the weight. Smoke curled from chimneys across town, but few dared the frozen roads. Evelyn, her strength still fragile but her pride raw, knew she could not remain hidden forever. Food would run thin, and worse than hunger was the gnaw of shame, what the town must already be saying. With her daughter wrapped tight and pressed against her chest, she gathered her courage. Dakota said nothing when she pulled on her faded cloak. He only handed her a pair of moccasins, lined in fur, far warmer than her worn boots. She hesitated, then accepted, bowing her head in silence before stepping into the brittle air. The road to town crunched beneath her, each step sinking into powder that rose above her ankles. The baby stirred, whimpering softly. Evelyn rocked her gently, whispering comfort, though her own voice trembled with dread. She had walked these streets many times before, yet never as she did now, feeling eyes waiting behind curtains, judgments ready to cut her skin. The first door creaked open as she reached the main street. Martha Briggs, shawl knotted beneath her chin, leaned against the frame, her mouth curved sharp as a blade. "Well," Martha said, voice carrying. "If it isn't Mrs. Carter, though I suppose she isn't quite that anymore, is she? Traipsing about with an Apache like she's his wife." Heat rose to Evelyn's cheeks, though the cold gnawed her bones. She kept walking, eyes lowered, clutching the baby tighter. The silence of the street seemed to amplify Martha's words, until they echoed against the empty storefronts. A pair of men unloading sacks from a wagon paused to watch. One spat into the snow. Sheriff Amos stood near the livery, hat low, pipe clamped between his teeth. He squinted as she passed, his voice slow, carrying disapproval more than malice. "Best be careful, ma'am. Folks here don't take kindly to women who change sides. You think that Apache'll keep you? You're making a fool of yourself." Evelyn stopped then, the words like a slap. She turned toward him, her body trembling, though she tried to stand steady. "He didn't leave me in the snow," she said, voice thin but sharp. "He didn't walk away when my child cried." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The men looked away. Martha huffed. Amos shifted, pipe smoke curling into the pale sky. Evelyn's breath quaked, and she hurried on before tears could betray her. Inside the mercantile, the warmth pressed close, carrying the smell of flour and kerosene. Elias Boone, broad-shouldered and quiet, glanced up from stacking tins. His eyes softened when he saw her. He nodded, but said nothing, as though his silence were a shield. Evelyn gathered what little she could afford, her hands shaking as she set them on the counter. The shopkeeper accepted her coins with a frown, lingering too long on the sight of the child's small face. She left swiftly, the bundle in her arms heavier than its weight. The whispers trailed behind her, woven of pity, scandal, curiosity. Her pride lay raw, but she did not break. She returned to the road, walking past the church, where bells tolled faintly through the crisp air. She remembered kneeling there once, Thomas's hand tight in hers, both of them younger, brighter. That life felt like a mirage now, something seen across too much distance to believe in. The trek back to the cabin was slower, the baby fussing against her breast. Snow glittered in the late light, casting shadows that stretched long and solemn. When she reached the door, she found Dakota waiting, standing as though he had been watching for her since she left. His presence filled the space before the cabin, bare chest unflinching against the cold. She paused, breath clouding, before stepping forward. He took the bundle of supplies without comment, setting them inside. She followed, her legs weak, her heart heavy. By the fire, she sank onto the blanket, tears she had stifled now spilling freely. She pressed her lips to her daughter's head, murmuring, "I thought I could face them." But their eyes cut sharper than knives. Dakota crouched by the hearth, laying wood on the flames. He did not look at her, yet his silence seemed to listen. When he rose, he set a piece of bread before her, coarse but warm, placing it gently at her side. She looked up, startled, but he had already returned to his stool, carving with steady hands. The gesture undid her. She broke the bread, ate slowly, the taste filling her with more than food. Gratitude swelled, though she did not speak it aloud. Instead, she wiped her cheeks, steadying her breath. That night, after the child fell asleep, Evelyn sat near the fire, sewing a tear in one of his blankets with thread she found in her bundle. The simple act steadied her. When she finished, she folded it neatly and placed it by his stool. He glanced at it, then at her, his dark eyes holding hers for a moment longer than before. No words passed, yet something shifted between them, something fragile but alive. Later, when he returned from outside, snow dusting his hair, she saw the cut along his forearm, thin but bleeding. Instinct moved her. She reached for a cloth, stepped close, and pressed it gently against his skin. His arm was solid beneath her hand, warmth radiating through her palm. He did not flinch, only watched her, eyes quiet, face unreadable. When she finished, she stepped back, her heart pounding. As the fire burned low, she whispered to her child, unaware he could hear, "I thought love was a man who stayed." But maybe it is just a man who shows up again and again, until the world cannot deny him. Her words floated in the hush, soft, trembling. Across the room, his jaw tightened, and though he did not turn, the weight of his silence was answer enough. The storm outside had calmed, but another storm gathered in whispers across town, sharp with judgment. Evelyn could feel it pressing closer, ready to break against her walls. Yet as she looked at the child sleeping safely, and the man whose presence filled the room like a shield, she knew she was not entirely alone. Still, the question lingered, heavy as the snow on rooftops. When the town decided to act, would Takota's strength be enough to stand against them? And would she have the courage to stand beside him? Winter pressed harder as the days shortened, the sky heavy with steel clouds that promised more snow than the earth could bear. Evelyn rose each morning with her child clutched close, the cabin walls breathing frost despite the fire. Survival became ritual. Takota's footsteps before dawn as he split wood, her hands nursing the flames back to life, the baby's soft whimpering as daylight seeped through the seams of the shutters. It was a rhythm both fragile and unyielding, their lives stitched together by necessity more than words. The food dwindled. Dried venison shrank to crumbs, the flour barrels scraped near empty. Takota returned each evening with new provisions. Hares caught in his snares, a deer hauled across his shoulders, sometimes nothing but silence etched into his face. Evelyn learned not to ask. She cleaned the game with clumsy fingers, guided once by his large hands steadying hers, showing her how to angle the knife, how to let the blade follow the bone instead of fight it. She had never thought herself capable of such work, but each task completed lit a faint flame in her chest, a pride that had nothing to do with the gossiping eyes of town. One morning he placed an axe in her hand. The woodpile was shrinking, and his gaze said more than words. She would help, not because she must, but because she could. The handle felt strange, too large in her grip, but he stood behind her, guiding her arms, the warmth of his body at her back. The blade struck clumsily, splintering the log instead of splitting it clean. She grimaced, but he nodded once, as though failure was still victory for trying. Again she raised it, again he steadied her, until the log cracked neatly in two, the sound sharp as a gunshot against the white silence. She laughed then, breathless, a sound she had not heard from herself in weeks. He almost smiled, the corner of his mouth curving before he turned away, stacking the wood. Their bond deepened not through speech but through gestures. His hand brushing snow from her shoulders when she stumbled, her fingers resting briefly on his arm as she bandaged a cut. Each act carried weight, unspoken vows whispered in silence. At night she lay beside her sleeping child, watching his form outlined in the dim glow of embers, his chest rising and falling with a steadiness that lulled her. She wondered what it would mean to live not as a burden sheltered by him, but as something equal, a woman whose worth could not be shattered by abandonment. Yet the world outside the cabin walls did not forget her. When she ventured into town again, carrying the baby bundled against her, she felt the sharpened stares cut deep. Men spat in the snow at her passing. Women turned their backs. Children whispered. Elias Boone offered her a quiet nod, his kindness a rare balm, but it could not drown the louder voices. She heard one man murmur, "Her babe will grow up Apache if she stays," and the words burned into her, hotter than the fire she left behind. That night, she did not weep. She sat by the hearth and sewed a patch onto Takota's shirt with careful stitches, each thrust of the needle steadying her resolve. She was no longer the woman begging for mercy on church steps. She was surviving and more, she was enduring with dignity no one could strip away. The days blurred into a pattern of labor and silence, yet beneath it lay a current she could not ignore. Once, when he returned late, blood streaked across his arm from a hunt, she pressed a cloth against the wound, her hand lingering longer than it needed to. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable, but she saw something there, something that made her heart stumble, not from fear but from a question she could not yet name. Another evening, as the storm rose outside, he sat sharpening his knife while she rocked the child. The firelight caught his face, chiseling it into lines of strength and solitude. She whispered to the baby, though the words felt meant for him. "We thought love was a man who stayed. But perhaps it is simpler. Perhaps it is the one who shows up again and again, until you cannot imagine facing the world without him." She thought him lost in his work, But when she glanced up, his knife was still, his gaze fixed on the flames, jaw clenched as though her words had carved into him. The winter tested them further. A storm nearly trapped them while gathering wood. Evelyn stumbled, the child crying against her chest, snow clawing at her legs. She felt her strength falter, ready to sink into the drifts, but Dakota turned, his body a shield against the wind, his arms wrapping around both her and the child. His heat, his strength, bore them back to the cabin. She collapsed inside, shivering, and he bent over her, brushing snow from her hair with a gentleness that undid her more than the storm had. Afterward, she rose different. When she carried water from the frozen stream, she walked taller. When she returned to town, she held her daughter high, ignoring the whispers. Pride did not erase judgment, but it dulled its sting. Yet whispers grew into something darker. One evening, Elias Boone stopped her discreetly outside the mercantile, his voice low. "Some men say it ain't right, you living with him. They're stirring each other up. Talking about driving you out before spring." Her breath froze. She clutched her baby tighter, nodding stiffly, then hurried back to the cabin, the warning echoing louder than the wind. Inside, the fire roared, Dakota sitting silent, knife in hand. She watched him from across the flames, her mind torn between fear and certainty. The world outside was gathering against them, but here in this cabin, she had found something she could not name, something that gave her the strength to lift her chin despite the shame pressed upon her. That night, the fire burned low, the storm keening through the trees. She lay awake, the baby breathing softly at her side, and turned toward the man across the room. His eyes were open, catching the faint glow of embers. Their gazes met, and in the silence, a vow passed between them. Not spoken, not formal, but etched deeper than words could reach. Still, as the wind battered the walls and the snow mounted higher, Evelyn knew the judgment of the town was no longer whispers but a storm of its own. And storms, she had learned, could not be ignored. They demanded a reckoning. The blizzard arrived without warning, a wall of white swallowing the horizon, howling through the pines like a beast unchained. The cabin groaned beneath its fury, shutters rattling, snow piling high against the door. Evelyn held her child close, rocking gently, while Dakota stood near the window slit, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing as shadows gathered in the storm. The sound of boots crunched faintly outside, muffled by the roar of wind, but unmistakable. The storm had not come alone. Evelyn's heart seized. She rose, clutching her daughter, and met his gaze across the firelight. He gave no words, only a nod, a silent acknowledgement of what they both knew. The town had come. The gossip that had burned in whispers now pressed at their door like flame in the snow. She thought of Elias Boone's warning, of the spit in the street, of Martha Briggs's sharp tongue, and felt the weight of it all crashing into this single night. The pounding began, fists against wood, voices rising above the storm. "Send her out." Sheriff Amos's voice cracked through the blizzard, hard and cold. "She don't belong with you, and neither does that babe. This is decent ground, not a place for mixing blood." Evelyn's breath caught. Her legs trembled, but she planted her feet. Dakota moved past her, silent as ever, and placed his hand against the door, as though measuring the strength it would need to hold. The voices swelled, anger woven with fear, torches flickering in the dark beyond. She smelled the smoke through the cracks, sharp and threatening. Her daughter whimpered, burying her face against Evelyn's breast. The sound pierced her, fragile and desperate. She had lived through abandonment, through shame, through whispers sharp as knives. But she would not let this mob take what little she had left. She turned to Dakota, her voice breaking yet firm. "If they want to cast me out, they'll have to drag me." For the first time, his eyes softened, as though her defiance carved itself into him. He reached out, his hand brushing her arm, grounding her. Then he lifted the heavy bar from the door, his chest bare though the air sliced like ice, and stepped into the blizzard. The wind howled around him, torches sputtering in the stormlight. He stood taller than the flames, muscles gleaming with frost, an axe in his grip. The crowd faltered at the sight, their shouts thinning to uncertain murmurs. Amos pushed forward, his hat rim rimed with snow, his face ruddy with drink and rage. "She ain't yours," he barked. "She's one of us. You've got no claim." Dakota's voice rumbled low, carrying even through the storm. I found her in the snow. Her man gone. Child near death. She mine now. Each word fell like stone, unmoved, undeniable. The men shifted, glancing at one another, their courage rattling against the truth of what they had not done, the shame of what he had. Martha's voice cut sharp from the crowd, shrill as the wind. She's a fool and a disgrace. Don't let them shame us all. Evelyn could bear no more. She stepped out onto the threshold, the baby clutched to her chest, snow stinging her cheeks. Her cloak whipped in the gale, her hair lashed across her face, but her voice rang clear, rising above the wind. This man saved me when no one else would. Not one of you lifted a hand when I stood in the street with my child crying in the cold. He carried us, fed us, kept us alive. If that shames you, then so be it. But I will not leave him. The mob hushed. The torches hissed, their flames bending beneath the storm. Amos's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked at her, then at the babe, then at the man standing like a fortress before them, and something in his eyes faltered. The blizzard thickened, snow swirling so fierce the world itself seemed to demand silence. One by one, men lowered their torches, their anger drowned by the storm and the weight of her words. Elias Boone, near the back, pulled his hat low and muttered, "Come on, leave him be." His voice carried enough sense to tip the balance. Slowly, grudgingly, the crowd broke apart, shadows retreating into the white until only the wind remained. Evelyn swayed, weak with relief, clutching her child so tightly she feared she might crush her. Dakota lowered the axe, his chest rising steady, his gaze sweeping the night until he was certain they were gone. Then he turned, snow clinging to his hair and shoulders, and looked at her. She stepped down from the threshold into the snow, meeting him there in the storm. Her face lifted, wet with tears and snowflakes alike. "You are the only one who stayed," she whispered, the words trembling but fierce. He reached for the baby first, lifting her gently, cradling her against the warmth of his chest. Then he bent his forehead to hers, a gesture as old as earth itself, binding without need for vows. The storm raged around them, but within that circle of breath and touch, there was only stillness. Evelyn closed her eyes, pressing her hand against his arm, feeling the solidity of him, the truth of his presence. For the first time since her husband's shadow vanished into the snow, she felt not abandoned but claimed, not as possession, but as someone worth saving, worth standing beside. Behind them, the cabin glowed with firelight, defiant against the storm. Before them, the snow stretched endless, a land both merciless and alive. Evelyn drew in a breath, steady, resolute, and lifted her face to the wind. The world had cast her aside, but here, with her child quiet against Dakota's chest and his strength anchoring her, she no longer feared the cold or the whispers. She had found something stronger than shame, fiercer than judgment. She had found the dignity of survival, the unspoken bond that could not be broken by storm or scorn. And as the gale howled its last, Evelyn knew this night was not an end but a beginning, though what it would demand of her heart, she had yet to face.